We're going to talk a little Boston College right now, and we've got Dan Rubin with us from bceagles.com. And for those watching the video, you can tell he's got a little assist going right now as well. Congratulations, first of all. She's asleep. We'll see how long that lasts here as we get going, right?
This right here is all the football knowledge in my house comes. This is our source, is the sleeping baby. I just absorb everything. It's one of those where I'm hoping and praying that she'll sleep through. When I say she'll sleep through anything, I probably shouldn't say that too loud. But she is all my football knowledge. So if I make any wrong assumptions about this game, we blame her.
We'll pick her brain on the BC run game here in a little bit, right?
Yeah. Well, she can solve that. She's a better person than all.
Exactly, right? Let's start with the head coach, Dan, Jeff Hafley. This is his third year. 6-5 the first year, and I think that for the most part, people seemed pretty optimistic about that 6-5 first season. Seemed on the right track. They go 500 last year, but 3-7 this year. Where does Hafley stand right now, kind of on the popularity scale there among BC fans?
Well, it's funny that you're asking me this week and not last week. I'll just be open and honest about that. If you'd have come to me last week and asked the question, I'd have turned around and said, I a lot of people don't actually like the direction of the way things are going because recency bias when you're looking at a 2-7 season. There's some honest, good, hard questions about the direction of the team and how it looked in certain areas, especially going into the Duke game, not even coming out of the Duke game. When you go back to the Connecticut game, it was pretty dicey there for a hot stretch. But now I think people are starting to see the product of the byproduct of the work. I think the popularity might not be back to its fullest extent that it was in the offseason when, the rumor mill was he's going to leave. We need to do everything to keep him here. But at the same time, they're starting to see some of the byproducts of what BC puts into things and the way this season has gone, and the fact that they were able to pick up that win last week does a lot to kind of grab some of the momentum back that maybe the team didn't have through the first half and in the middle part of the season.
It's funny how just a win here or there can shift things and change everybody's mood really quickly.
I know, and against a ranked opponent too, and I know that everybody makes the well, it wasn't against Devin Leary, and you say, all right, yeah, but that's still a very good football team, and BC hadn't beaten a truly ranked team, a consensus top 25 team since the USC game back in 2014.
Oh my!
So I mean, you're when you're able to pick that up, a one on the road, which hadn't happened in 16 years or 14 years, it's a big deal to pick that up and to show that type of progress. Because as much as you say, well, there's progress, right? There's stuff in practice, you don't see it to actually get a tangible result. Was a really big step for that team.
Well, and I mean, they lost to UConn this year, and that was the first time they had ever lost to UConn. And that's a program that, quite frankly, a lot of people have been talking in the last couple of years. They should just go back to FCS and that kind of thing. I imagine there had to be a lot of people on the cliff at that point, when you drop that game.
I might have been one of them. Given the amount of friends that I have that went to that school, I was really taking that one on the frontal cortex. But that was a really hard one to swallow. That was a incredibly hard game, just to look at and say that you lost that game, because it not only did it look like you lost that game, but it also looked like you didn't have the oomph that you'd had in some of those games when you're like, all right, you're playing tight with Clemson and then you just give up a lot of points at the end, or you were tight with Wake Forest and then the game got away. It was BC lost that game and didn't look good doing it. And that was really the hardest perspective. Now, one of the things that's kind of been the hallmark of this team has always been when you have adversity, you go through it, you embrace it. You don't look at it and say, all right, we're just going to ignore it and act like it didn't happen, put it away and ignore this result and move on. They legitimately were, we have to look at this. We have to look at everything. How did this happen? This was an unacceptable result given the preparation that we thought we were putting in during the week. So if we're putting in the preparation and if we expect to win, which we do 12 times every year, then we need to go take a look at this and figure out what we're doing wrong. And you saw that a little bit against Duke, where they came out and played better. And then you saw it against NC State, where they actually won a game.
Yeah. So I guess I won't beat around the bush and just get straight to Phil Jurkovec, because obviously he's the biggest subplot to this, this whole game this weekend. So I guess we'll start with, he's obviously making his return to Notre Dame, his third year there at BC now. Injuries have obviously played a big factor in his play the last couple of years. How would you describe the Phil Jurkovec you've seen when he is healthy? And I hope there's enough games, to go on where he has been healthy. But how would you describe full strength Phil Jurkovec?
I feel like he's been the quarterback that you just wish you could have seen more of. And because every time he got started, he ran into some injury that there was, every start was a false start for him. That first year, he reinvented the offense and everything was great in 2020. And he come out last year and plays well, but we didn't really know what Phil, the Colgate first part of UMass, that's not really enough to go on to say, well, he was putting it together, especially with those two opponents. And then comes back at the end of the year, diminished, admittedly, after the wrist injury. And then this year had a bunch of problems that really weren't his own doing. It's hard when you're a quarterback and you're playing behind a new offensive line that didn't have the same lineup every week for 6 or 7 weeks. And then you start getting a little frustrated. You start hearing a few footsteps here and there, and don't make the throws that you should necessarily think you should be making. But then you get hurt again. And so now here we are down the end of the season, and you have a quarterback in Emmett Morehead who's playing exceptionally well.
Yeah.
But would Phil Jurkovec have been playing that well behind an offensive line? You can't look at it and say, well, they should have started Morehead at the beginning of the season, because Morehead might not have played that well behind the offensive line that was always in transition. And now we don't get a chance to see what Phil would play behind an offensive line that actually gets to play together for 2-3 games.
Well, and I mean, the sack totals are astounding. Jurkovec has been sacked 25 times, and even Morehead in the times he's played has been sacked 14. That's a lot of sacks they have given up. Are they showing signs of improving? Are they, where is that line in front of those guys right now?
It's getting better. They had a couple of converted defensive linemen on the offensive line, and they were down the depth chart to the degree that when you look at the two deep, you're seeing a whole bunch of oars, because if one guy can start, they can take another guy and shift him over to a different position. So when you're playing teams with all these graduate students and transfers or guys who are back for a 5th or 6th year, you're looking at Boston College and you're saying, okay, if the left guard can play, then we can take the guy who's currently playing left guard and move him to right tackle, and the right tackle can shift to left tackle, and the left tackle can go back to right guard. And that was really what it was like for 7 weeks. So, wow. Yeah, it was real tough. And so it's gotten better, because now all right, this is the same offensive line for the 3rd week. The guys know the cadence. They know who's supposed to go where. And as a quarterback, all right, this guy might need a little help on this play, or I might need to roll out to my left or look differently and see different areas. And the contact that these guys were taking in the first 6-7 weeks, it was like watching an old video game where you just saw guys getting like the old Madden games when you saw like the ambulance coming on the field practically. That's how often they were getting hit. And it's good to see that they've made strides forward. I would argue that the line is probably the biggest improvement right now, just because of how bad it was playing for a stretch. And it still needs to get better. I mean, you see what happened with the running stats. It's just not where you'd want it to be at this stage, but it has gotten better thanks to the continuity over the last couple of weeks.
When it comes to Jurkovec himself, do you think that he's lived, there was a lot of hype that followed him from Notre Dame, a highly recruited guy, and he's coming from Notre Dame and all that. Has he lived up to the expectations that people had for him going in there?
I think it's kind of an incomplete. And unfortunately, it's an incomplete, because when he played and when he was healthy, the answer was absolutely yes. I mean, this offense, that first year especially, I mean, you felt like you were just scratching the surface, and he's still going to go down as one of the greatest quarterbacks in program history strictly by the numbers. What he did and what he is doing is incredible. It is really unfortunate that he has not been able to play out a full season, because if you extrapolate those numbers, he enters into the conversation as one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks that's ever played for Boston College. The problem being is that we may never get to those numbers. We may never see him get to those numbers, because he was unable to play a full season.
Interesting. I mean, obviously Flutie and Matt Ryan are the first two who come to mind. What, like Foley? Like who would you put?
I would, if you extrapolate the numbers, given the fact that he was a 3-year starter, he may have started touching some of Foley's numbers.
Okay.
Those might have been kind of along the lines. And then behind him, you get the Hasselbeck brothers and the Brian St. Pierre's of the world. And I think he would have probably landed and is going to land even within that category, which is a pretty big group of guys who played through the mid 90s through about 2000, right before Matt Ryan got around. So I think when you look at his numbers and how they're going to amass, I would put him more in a category of a Tim Hasselbeck overall, and probably by the end, even maybe Brian St. Pierre, but I think St. Pierre's numbers trend even into the Foley category, at least the bottom end of it.
He's listed at the top of the depth chart this week, even after the game that Moorhead had last week in that win over NC State. Is there any way that he doesn't start, do you think, in this return to Notre Dame this weekend?
I don't know. The whole thing being is everybody's kind of day to day when it comes to their injuries, and that's kind of the good way of putting it. I know that if he's healthy and he's ready to play, he's starting. That's kind of been the message from Jeff Hafley is Phil Jurkovec is very much the starting quarterback. If he is ready to play and if he can go, he will go. And if not, then they'll turn to Moorhead.
I imagine, it's still going to mean something for him coming here because he did start here and everything. He's obviously, had some things to say over the last couple of years. Would probably, there would be a different level of animosity, I guess, if Brian Kelly and some of those guys were still here and compared, with him gone now.
I mean, there'd be a different level of animosity for me. Brian Kelly went to St. John's Prep and is from Chelsea, Mass. And
that's true.
Two towns over from where I grew up in my rival high school. So, I mean, where I went to high school, and I realized it was about 10 years after him. I was like, the minute I found out he was from Chelsea and went to St. John's Prep, I was like, oh, there is no way I can it's just impossible for me to ever root for him. It's just, I can't wrap Brian St. Pierre was a St. John's Prep quarterback who went from Danvers, Mass up to, it was playing at BC. I'm sitting in the stands and I'm like, yeah, I'm rooting for him. But he's still a Prep guy.
That's funny because you don't, talk with that Louisiana accent that Brian Kelly thought he had for a while.
That was probably one of the top 3 funnest, most hilarious days of when he came out and he said that. And I was like, wait a second here. This guy's from Chelsea. This guy lives under the Tobin Bridge. What are we doing? What are we doing here? No one's mistaking you for where you're from.
Well, there's another Notre Dame connection, of course, to this game as well. Subplot number 2, John McNulty, who is the tight ends coach here, and he's in his first season as offensive coordinator there. What's kind of the sentiment around him right now?
The offense has been a work in progress, and I think bringing him in as an offensive coordinator was a good jump off point. I think that, like anything else, when you're working with a new head coach, or a new head coach and a new offensive coordinator combination, there's going to be some growing pains. I think they hit a little bit of that in terms of the beginning of the season, plus a new offensive line coach who inherited a young line that they needed to work with. So I like some of the things that they're doing on offense a lot. I think that some of the different schemes that they put in are just interesting that you see, like some of the downfields, crossing routes and slants that they utilize. They move Zay Flowers a lot around a lot. They'll take him from the slot, move him outside, they'll line him up, put him in motion, bring him through the backfield. They might actually line him up in the backfield and then flank him out. Like some of the things that are in there are complicated, and when you see it, it's been a privilege to watch it kind of develop, even though again the production maybe hasn't been what you want it to be based off of what everyone hoped it would be in August when everyone got to training camp.
Dan, we've talked about here, different Notre Dame rivals these last few weeks, and these two teams used to play obviously a lot more often. From Boston College's perspective, is Notre Dame at the top of the heap in terms of their rivals?
Well, I'll tell you what, about 20 minutes ago, I actually got an opportunity to ask Jeff Hafley that directly, because I was coming at it from a guy who was sitting in the who still remembers listening to David Gordon's kick on the radio in 90.
Wow.
Like I was driving around the mall parking lot trying to listen to the game with my older brother and my mom drive. Oh man, I remember those days. And
You're
remember
hurting a
the
lot of Notre Dame people right now.
yeah, there's a lot of people who shut this off. And then the next year, '94, still near and dear to my heart when Notre Dame came out and got smushed at Alumni Stadium that year. In the green jerseys in '02, bringing up a lot of good fond memories that a lot of people have on their laptop with.
That Dillingham game in '02, that's right, with those greens. Yep.
So for me, this will always, 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 always be number one. Like this is it. This is my BC could go 1-11, and if the win was over Notre Dame, I'd call the season a success. So they understand that around here. They also understand that it's not a real rivalry if you're not holding up your end of the bargain. And BC has not beaten Notre Dame for a very long time, and that doesn't settle well in Boston, where Notre Dame is a quote home team. I mean, it's a popular team out here, and I've got friends that still constantly get on me about the fact that is it really a rivalry? There's only one way. There's only one way to make it a rivalry, and
that's right.
And that's exactly what Jeff Hafley said.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They don't. It's funny because they used to play more often before Notre Dame went into this ACC agreement. I imagine from Boston College's perspective, you'd like to see Notre Dame show up on the schedule more often.
I love it every year. It's the one game that I from a regional standpoint out here, I am a very big proponent of playing local teams. Even though BC lost to Connecticut, I'd play them every other year and cycle UMass into that. Play UMass and UConn every year if I could. But Notre Dame, if you had to pick one opponent that I could put on that schedule, home and away, every other year, home and home, and ensure that it exists, it'd be this one. And part of it is my relationship to the '90s and BC's rise and.
Right.
And Coach Holtz going for it on fourth down.
I mean, that was really it. Yeah,
that was it.
With that. Yeah.
But this game is what I live for. And for me, growing up and going to an Irish Catholic high school where our colors were blue and gold, our fight song was the Notre Dame Victory March, and my athletic director was a Notre Dame guy. It was for me the biggest day of the biggest week on the like. You cannot tell me otherwise. This has to be one of those games that just exists. Because it is our Army Navy, it is our Iron Bowl, it is our backyard brawl, it's our USC, UCLA, or whichever one you want to put in there.
Dan Rubin from BCEagles.com. We made it, Dan. She looks like she's even sleeping deeper right now than when we started.
I was really worried that her snoring was going to start coming through the microphone, number one. And number two, I'm just going to say we put her to sleep talking football. If this had been her sister, she'd be talking football. So we know which one's the football fan of the family.
I appreciate your time, Dan, because I know, it sounds like you and your wife are plenty busy there these days. So I appreciate you getting that nap in with her while we were doing this.
The time, if you time everything perfectly, you can really dive into your football with your while you're naps. I'm going to give it a couple of years, and then you'll see me. I'll be gray and losing my mind, tearing my hair out. But no, I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to seeing this game this weekend. I hope it's an enjoyable game, if nothing else, and brings a little fire back to this one, because I feel like for both of our sakes, it'd be really great if BC Notre Dame got a little bit of that fire going again.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that. All right. Thanks again, Dan. Take care.
Thank you.